And all down, I'm Count Zero. Well, it's time for another of my video game reviews, and this week I'm taking a look at the Bourne Conspiracy, one of the last games put out by Sierra Entertainment before their parent company, Vivendi, was bought up by Activision, and Sierra was quietly dispatched and dumped out in the Jersey Pine Barrens. Now, when it comes to reviewing licensed games, reviewing the game's story is a bit more straightforward than usual. Oftentimes, particularly when dealing with film licensed games, most of the story beats from the film will be used in the game. This becomes the main story beats of the game. It's pretty solid, pretty straightforward. It's not too hard to take apart, and not too hard to take apart, but also it's not too bad. If the film story stands up, the game story will generally stand up. If the film story is bad, the same criticisms can generally be applied for the game. Where this difference comes in, though, is the padding, because there will be padding. No 90-minute film can be stretched out to a 10-hour or even 6-hour single-player campaign and not need padding. It isn't. I mean, even if you license an over-the-top action film like Shoot 'Em Up, where the number of scenes where there aren't giant fights going on are outnumbered by the amount of the runtime that is giant, epic, over-the-top gunfights, you're still going to have to extend this just because of the time difference. And so, when it comes to the padding, well, it all becomes a matter of tone, which we'll talk about in a bit more, because the tone of the film and the tone of the padding has to mesh. Otherwise, and that's where the real criticism comes in. So, on to the Bourne Conspiracy. I'd like to take a moment and consider the title. The Bourne Conspiracy. This is a game released in 2008 after all three Bourne films have been released. In fact, the last Bourne film, The Bourne Ultimatum, was released in 2007, so there was a year between the release of this game and the release of the film, its final film. Logically, with a title like The Bourne Conspiracy, you would think, well, we can cover all three films here. It fits, encompassing all three films. It's a title that suggests a degree of scope beyond one book, one novel, one film. You could have a solid story with all three games, all three films encompassed in one game, each with minimal padding and cut scenes that cover all the major plot points. If you thought, looking at the title, The Bourne Conspiracy, that that's what you'd be getting, you thought wrong. Instead, The Bourne Conspiracy adapts the first Bourne film, The Bourne Identity, and only that film. If you've seen the movie, and it's likely that you have, then the plot should be familiar to you, but I'm going to recap it briefly anyway, just for those who haven't seen it. Jason Bourne, an operative for the secret government organization Treadstone, is shot while attempting to assassinate some African warlord. He survives, but loses his memory and tries to rediscover who he is, with the help of a woman he encounters at the U.S. Embassy, Marie. While looking for the clues to his identity, he undergoes various attempts on his life from other members of Treadstone as they think that he's gone rogue. That part of the story, the part used in the film, is implemented very well in the game, and sticks very closely in terms of to the plot of the film, and most importantly, to the film's tone, at least for the majority of that portion. The problem comes with the game's padding, and in particular the tone of the padding. The game uses two methods to pad out the game. First is with the game's hand-to-hand combat. In the film, Jason Bourne is able to dispatch most enemies fairly quickly. The only time Bourne really fights opponents who are his equals when he takes on other Treadstone agents hand-to-hand. In the game, on the other hand, well, Bourne sucks. Whenever Jason goes into hand-to-hand combat, things switch to sort of a fist-fighting minigame like something out of an NHL game. You turtle until you get an opening, then you hit a combo of about 3 to 4 hits, and then hope you spotted the opening correctly. If you did, then you get some hits in. And this charges up a momentum meter, or adrenaline meter, which will let you do a takedown move, which will automatically knock out lesser enemies, or just deal extra damage to bosses or tougher enemies. If you're unlucky, though, if you miss the opening, then your opponent will do one of two things. If you're fortunate, he'll simply block it and you'll deal no damage. If you're unlucky, though, then your opponent will get several hits in on his own, and thus deal damage to you. And depending on the difficulty, you could quite possibly get knocked out by a generic thug, depending on the strength and number of your opponents. And because of this, also, these fights can run for several minutes, depending on how well you're doing. And again, if you misread openings, if you mess up some quick time events, you could very easily get knocked out by John T. Mook. But again, if you land the combos right, you can use the opportunities to really heavily charge up your adrenaline meter, to do a takedown move in hand-to-hand, to knock out enemies instantly, or to let you use ranged takedown moves to take out a bunch of enemies with your gun very quickly. This leads me to the other form of padding in the game, the flashback levels. In the film, we only see two of Bourne's missions, his first mission and his last. Both are relatively tame affairs. We only see the conclusion of his final mission, where he goes in and tries to kill the dictator. And we see his entire first mission in its entirety, which is basically walking into a house and shooting a guy. In the game, on the other hand, we get numerous flashback levels taking us to various points in Bourne's career. Frankly, these levels look like they belong in an entirely different game. While the levels taken directly from the film mimic the tone and events of the film very well, the flashback levels are your standard third-person shooter levels. No, really, it's your bog standard third-person shooter. You wade through linear levels, and yes, the path twists and turns, but you're basically going in a straight line, killing generic thug after generic thug. And you kill a small army's worth of various generic thugs all throughout the game. Let me give you some examples. In the third level of the game, you're infiltrating the boat with the dictator that Bourne tries to assassinate in his final mission. So first off, before you kill the dictator, you're tasked with disabling his escape routes, specifically his escape submarine and his helicopter. Now, first, if you're doing your job right, he wouldn't be trying to escape because you shot him in his freaking head. Sabotaging his escape vehicles would tell him that something was up. Second, escape submarine? Really? That sounds like something of James Bond to Jason Bourne. And I mean like Roger Moore James Bond. Additionally, over the course of the mission, you end up massacring practically the entire crew of the ship, but through all of this, your target remains sound asleep. Now, the half-assed explanation we get for this is that because the ship is going through a storm, he can't hear the running gunfight and no one wants to disturb him. I'm sorry, I call bullshit. Is he like taking sleeping pills or something? Because even if he is instructed not to be disturbed, by the time one of your escape vehicles has been sabotaged, the logical thing to do would be to wake him and tell him what's up. And even then, there's a loud running gunfight. Guns are loud. So if you have all this big gunfight going on, then that should be waking him up. You should be hearing this. If the storm is loud enough to mask the sound of gunfire, then for the same reason, he shouldn't be able to sleep through this storm. Then, in the next flashback level, Bourne is assigned to kill a war criminal who's set to be transported to The Hague for trial. However, he's rescued by some mercenaries who are working for him, leading to a massive running gunfight through the Zurich airport with hundreds of civilian witnesses, not to mention all the security camera footage that's throughout the airport. Really? I mean, good lord. There's no way you could cover this up. I mean, yes, you wouldn't get news choppers over the airport because it's an airport, but still, there are the surveillance cameras, there's eyewitnesses, you would definitely be getting the picture of Jason Bourne on all over the national news, on Sky TV, on the BBC, Al Jazeera, you name it, he'd be there, his face would be there. Finally, this sequence gets wrapped up by having a fist fight on the bad guy's cargo plane as he's trying to escape, ending with the pilot dead and Bourne grabbing a parachute and leaping out of the plane before it crashes into a mountain. Now, we've totally gone into James Bond territory here, almost literally, because this precise sequence, almost precise sequence, happened in the first Timothy Dalton film, The Living Daylights. Next level, which is probably the worst offender of all the flashback levels, well, not quite the worst, there is one that's even worse than that. We go to a mission where Bourne is assassinating a Ukrainian politician for no explanation for why this particular guy merits being killed. On your way through the level, after you pull off the assassination itself, you end up basically killing about half a company of the Ukrainian army, including blowing up an APC with an assault rifle. Yes, you heard me correctly, you blow up an APC with an assault rifle. I understand going for awesome, but this is just going for stupid. I mean, if you could blow up an APC with an assault rifle by shooting the fuel tank, like you do in the game, I mean, not just putting aside the Mythbusters, shooting the fuel tank doesn't work. If this was a universe where shooting the fuel tank did work, then you wouldn't use armored personnel carriers. The armor's there to stop assault rifle bullets. But at this point, you might as well, you could do this entire level over by having the guy be in a bad guy in a knockoff Humvee or Range Rover with a machine gun on top. Something slightly more logical, rational, plausible than this. But then again, to borrow a phrase from fellow internet critic Diamanda Hagen, this game and reality don't often meet. Then the worst offender of all of this, of all these padding, filler, flashback levels, Bourne is assigned to stop an arms deal from going down at a museum during a fancy fundraising dealer. So, after using melee to get through the first part of the level, we discover that the buyer is going to try and rip off the dealer, and things just get absolutely, totally silly. We end up having this gigantic running gunfight through a museum, so again, security equal to or possibly greater than the airport, complete with lots of surveillance cameras because priceless to $1 million to priceless antiquities are here and thus need to be documented and protected. And all this massive running gunfight, this all leads to a helicopter crash, with Bourne shooting the pilot and causing the helicopter to crash in a giant fireball. There's no way that Bourne gets out of this without getting identified or anything like that. I mean, yes, they may not know his name, but again, they'll be getting his picture. It's not like he's wearing a balaclava or anything like that, and you can see in the video footage from this game. Bourne is not trying to disguise his identity on this mission. The only thing possibly saving him from being identified is the fact that everyone he kills everyone in the course of the mission who could identify him has bullets in their heads. That's it. God, G.I. Joe is a better covert ops organization than Treadstone is. Even without the guys from CSI, you could tell that Jason Bourne was at all these various places. There's surveillance video from the airport and the museum. There's simply just a matter of, okay, seeing whose guns shot whose bullets, and whose guns are where. I mean, yeah, I know you can't. I mean, forensic science doesn't work to the degree that you could tell, okay, this guy died before these guys died, by a matter of a difference of minutes. But if one guy's dead over here with the gun from one of his buddies, and all the guys in the level are killed in this area are killed by this gun, odds are there's someone who's missing from this scene this crime scene. There's someone here who's not dead and who's not dead, who's left, who killed a lot of people, more people than who killed each other. And with the surveillance camera, you have a good idea what this guy looks like. I mean, all the stealth, all the subtlety, all the intrigue of the films is lost in favor of mindless gunplay and bloodshed. It's like a low-rent James Bond game, and indeed, all these levels feel like they come from another game entirely. So, here's my theory about what happened. High Moon Studios, the game's developer, was probably working on either on a James Bond themed action game, not actually James Bond, but with the theme of that style of espionage, style of spy action movie. While they were working on this game, after they got some assets developed, Vivendi gets the license for the Jason Bourne for the films, and somebody at Vivendi goes, "Well, High Moon Studios is already working on a game in this genre, so we'll give them we'll put them in charge of this project. They can handle it, and this is their second game. This would be really give them a big push they need to become more successful." And so High Moon starts work, but they get stuck with a deadline, a release date that they can't push back, and thus High Moon is stuck with having to reuse some assets from the other spy game, level design and that sort of thing, possibly even enemy assets, or even if not the whole engine. Well, I mean, it's using the Unreal Engine, but as far as for how they handle the shooting and that sort of stuff. And the High Moon Studio has to reuse all this stuff from the other game, even though the other game doesn't fit with the tone of the Jason Bourne franchise. And similarly, because of this shortened time to deal with, rather than adapting all three films, they have enough time to do the first film, to generate cutscenes, to do film-specific levels and that sort of thing. And indeed, most of the gameplay in the game is those filler levels. The poor sequences from the film take up a very small chunk of the game. The driving sequence, the hand-to-hand fight against the assassin in Jason Bourne's apartment, all that sort of stuff. And thus, this explains this real sense of whiplash we get between the flashback sequences and the movie sequences. But let's put aside my gripes for a moment. Let's just talk about the good things about this. And the controls are okay, outside of the fighting. Controls are pretty good, shooting is pretty solid. There isn't any iron sights or anything like that in the game, but you can zoom. But since we get this, if you look at the gameplay footage earlier, look at this dot cursor in the shooting sequences. When you're shooting, it actually allows for some real precision at range, which is nice. Also, the music game is good, and it does borrow a lot from the cues from the Bourne Identity. I believe in the driving sequence, I didn't see Ready Steady Go by Paul Oakenfold in the credits, but it does look like they did pay homage to the piece there for the driving sequence. The voice acting is okay too. The face for Jason Bourne, they didn't get the likeness or a sound-alike from Matt Damon, and the face they got, I can't remember the actor's name, but he played the main character, Johnny Goodboy, in Battlefield Earth. And he also was a sniper in, the team sniper in, Saving Private Ryan. Though the voice actor doesn't sound exactly like him, it's kind of more of a middle ground. It's not quite Matt Damon, but it is okay. It's passable. Other than that, it's been a while since I watched the first movie, so I can't speak for the sound-alike for Marie. But the character looks a lot like the movie version of Marie. And Alex Conklin also looks a lot like Chris Cooper. His voice actor doesn't quite sound like Chris Cooper, but he's close. He's close. Your handler during the missions, I suspect, is meant to be Ward Abbott, the other top guy from Treadstone, and he sounds about right. I mean, Brian Cox has a very distinctive voice, and thus, to the voice actor's credit, he's able to mimic it fairly well. I really feel like, at points, that definitely sounds like Brian Cox's voice. Now, with my Gears of War review, I talk about how I would have fixed things, how I would have done things somewhat differently with the story. So here, I'm going to talk about how I would have fixed the gameplay standpoint. I want to talk briefly about how I would have redone things. Mind you, I am playing Monday or Tuesday evening quarterback. But I mean, the best form of criticism is one where where you get told where you not only get advice on what you did wrong, but how to fix it. So, High Moon Studios, or anyone else if anyone from High Moon Studios or anyone who's working on a new Bourne game is watching this, here's my suggestions for what to do. Basically, in my opinion, for a proper Bourne game, you need a mix of the sneaky traversal gameplay of Splinter Cell with the blend into a crowd disguise gameplay of Hitman. Because, I mean, that's the way Bourne rolls. Bourne quickly knocks people out. As far as when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, when it comes to a fight, Bourne can take out people very quickly. And thus in the game, we should be able, the player, if he has to get in a melee fight with someone who's not another Treadstone agent, he should be able to, or something similar, he should be able to knock them out very quickly. If it's a cop or generic soldier or something like that, he should be able to knock them out. If it's, and also when it comes to guns, Bourne generally doesn't use guns, but if he does use guns and does have to shoot people, he takes them out very quickly. He's a very accurate marksman, and he's a quick marksman. So the gameplay should reflect that as well. For the Hitman elements, Jason Bourne also, part of the thing is, he can blend into a crowd extremely well. He can disappear, basically. He can do that, the X-Files, whatever, faster than the speed of shadow. A bus comes by, Bourne was standing there before, but he's gone now. And there needs to be a gameplay way to do that. Bourne should be able to, sort of like with Assassin's Creed, where you can kind of blend into a crowd of people and mask yourself among them. You should be able to do that. You should be able to disguise yourself. And Bourne doesn't wear a lot of disguises, but that'd be the best way to handle some of this stuff. Bourne knock out a guy and take his uniform vest or something like that. Something up to that degree should be in the game. Lets you keep track of information, basically mask your identity fairly well. For the hand-to-hand combat, that's a bit trickier because the hand-to-hand combat sequences in the films are very well done. I mean, they are a martial arts fight, a very good martial arts fight, and thus it becomes a question of how do you basically, to do it right, you can't just do a repetitive NHL hockey fight minigame. And doing it as a quick-time action event sequence isn't fun either, because to do a good fight scene right, you have a certain degree of dynamicism to the fight scene. So the ideal way to do this, I'd say, was basically you're going to have to build a fighting game minigame into your game. As a suggestion for what I do, I bind the four face buttons to each of your limbs: left arm, left leg, right leg. Use the shoulder buttons for grapple and interaction. For example, if you're near the desk, just an example from the fight scene in Bourne's apartment in the film. If you're near a desk, then you tap the interact button near the desk to grab a pin off the desk and use that as a weapon. You get a few attacks with it. You can do grapple, and then if you're near a object like a wall, furniture, radiator, window, what have you, tap the interact button to do that. To do an interaction attack with the object, like slam them into the wall, or grab a vase off the mantelpiece and smack him over the head with it while it's in a grapple. That sort of thing. And that's basically how you do it. That's how you would move the fight scene design over. It gives more momentum and movement to the scene, to the way the fight is done, more dynamicism. You're not tapping the same two buttons over and over again. Oh, block. Dedicated block button. Either dedicated block button or just hold back. I'd probably go with the dedicated block button, use one of the triggers for it. Possibly the same trigger that has grapple. Maybe either tap block or grapple when an enemy does an attack to do a hold or throw of some kind. I'd probably do tap grapple when an enemy goes in for an attack, if you time it right, to do a counter throw or something like that, just to make things a little more interesting. Now, as far as my final verdict on this game, skip it. This is a generic third-person shooter in a market full of generic third-person shooters. To their credit, this game doesn't try to force co-op or multiplayer or stuff like that where gameplay modes which don't fit with the tone of the game into the game. But there's enough content in here that doesn't fit anyway that, frankly, this could be anything. This doesn't need to be a Bourne game. I will say one thing in this game's favor. The one last thing is this game did inspire me to pick up the novel, The Bourne Identity, again. I hadn't read it since middle school. High school, and I figured it's time to reread it now. You may be able to anticipate a future review of the book in another episode. I might even try to get a hold of the miniseries and do a review of that as well. There was a miniseries done in 1988, and I like to compare the two. So, until next time, I count 0. Thanks for watching.